Southern California, 1965. An engineer stands at a desert test range, squinting through the heat shimmer. In his hand is a weapon that looks like it belongs in a science fiction film. It weighs almost nothing, it has almost no recoil, and when he pulls the trigger, what leaves the barrel is not a bullet, it's a rocket. The Gyrojet pistol represents one of the most audacious experiments in American firearms history. It was designed to make every conventional handgun obsolete. It promised to revolutionize combat. And for a brief moment in the 1960s, serious military planners believed it might actually work. The problem facing firearms designers in the early 1960s was not new, but the solutions being proposed were radical. The United States was in the midst of a technological revolution. Rockets were carrying men towards space. Guided missiles were redefining warfare. In this atmosphere, two engineers asked a question that seemed obvious. Why are we still shooting bullets? Robert Mainhart and Art Beale were not traditional gunsmiths. They were aerospace engineers who had founded MB Associates, a small California company specializing in advanced weapons research. When they looked at a pistol, they didn't see a perfected tool. They saw a design frozen in the 19th century. A conventional firearm operates on principles unchanged since the invention of the cartridge. Gunpowder explodes inside a sealed chamber. The bullet leaves at maximum velocity and immediately begins slowing. The weapon experiences significant recoil. The ammunition requires a heavy brass case to contain the explosion. Mainhart and Beale proposed eliminating all of it. Instead of a cartridge, they envisioned a self-contained rocket projectile. No case, no primer, no conventional powder charge. Just a solid fuel rocket motor, with 4 angled exhaust ports that would propel and stabilize the round in flight. The rocket wouldn't reach full velocity until several feet after leaving the barrel. Close-range performance would be weak, but at distance the round would actually accelerate. It would gain energy in flight. The implications were extraordinary. Almost no recoil, incredibly simple construction, lighter ammunition, and because the rocket continued accelerating in flight, effective range could exceed conventional handguns. The Gyrojet that emerged was unlike anything before it. Roughly 9 inches long, weighing just over a pound, no slide, no complex recoil mechanism, a manual cocking lever prepared each shot. The magazine fed from the top, reflecting the unusual rocket ammunition. Each round was a miniature rocket approximately ½ an inch in diameter. The front contained a hardened penetrator. The rear housed solid rocket fuel. 4 angled exhaust ports provided thrust and spin. When fired, an electric primer ignited the fuel, and the rocket pushed itself from the barrel. No explosion behind it, no conventional muzzle blast. Just acceleration as the motor burned. The first test. Firings revealed exactly what the engineers had predicted and feared. At point-blank range, the Gyrojet was pathetic. The rocket left the barrel slowly, drifting for the first few feet as the motor built thrust. A traditional pistol at arm's length would deliver devastating energy. The Gyrojet might bounce off a heavy coat. But beyond that initial gap, something remarkable happened. By 30 feet, it had surpassed many conventional handgun velocities. By 60 feet, it was travelling faster than almost any pistol bullet. And unlike a bullet which loses energy after leaving the barrel, the Gyrojet continued gaining speed until the fuel was exhausted. Penetration tests showed the rocket could punch through materials that would stop conventional rounds. The spin stabilization provided reasonable accuracy, and the complete absence of recoil meant follow-up shots could be fired with unusual precision. In theory. In practice, the Gyrojet had catastrophic problems. Ignition was inconsistent. Some rounds fired perfectly, others misfired entirely. The solid rocket fuel was sensitive to temperature and humidity, in ways conventional gunpowder was not. Ammunition that worked in California's dry heat could fail completely in Southeast Asian humidity. The exhaust ports were another vulnerability. Even small amounts of dirt could block them, destroying stability. In combat conditions, this was fatal. Soldiers needed tools that worked after being dropped in a rice paddy. The Gyrojet often didn't. Manufacturing tolerances were critical. A bullet doesn't care if its shape is slightly imperfect. A rocket with minor asymmetry in its exhaust ports would spiral wildly. Quality control made the ammunition expensive, and even with careful manufacturing, performance varied significantly. The US military tested the Gyrojet with fascination and skepticism. Special operations units experimented with it during the Vietnam War era, intrigued by its low weight and minimal signature. For certain specialized roles, the Gyrojet showed promise, but promise was not enough. Combat demands reliability. A soldier who pulls the trigger needs absolute certainty that the weapon will fire, that the round will fly true, that the target will go down. The Gyrojet offered no such certainty. MB Associates continued development, producing carbine and rifle variants. Each iteration addressed some problems while revealing new ones. Military planners remained interested but uncommitted. The weapon existed in a strange limbo, too innovative to dismiss but too unreliable to adopt. By traditional standards, the Gyrojet should never have worked at all. It violated principles proven over more than a century. It was weak where handguns needed to be strong. It relied on precision manufacturing that barely existed in the 1960s. The technology wasn't ready. The materials, the manufacturing techniques, the quality control systems needed to make the Gyrojet reliable did not exist. The idea was decades ahead of its time. And yet, the Gyrojet succeeded in one crucial way. It proved that handheld rocket weapons were possible. It demonstrated that a firearm could operate on entirely different principles and still deliver lethal performance. It showed that recoil could be virtually eliminated, that projectiles could accelerate in flight, that the future of small arms didn't have to follow the past. The Gyrojet didn't change combat, but it changed thinking. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The 1960s saw numerous attempts to revolutionize small arms. Caseless ammunition systems, flechette rounds, experimental designs appeared on proving grounds, but none shared the Gyrojet's fundamental reimagining of projectile propulsion. The Gyrojet's closest relative was not another firearm. It was the bazooka, the recoilless rifle, the rocket-propelled grenade. What the Gyrojet attempted was to miniaturize this concept to handgun scale, to make it practical for close combat. The comparison reveals why the attempt was so audacious and why it failed. Larger rocket weapons succeeded because they operated at ranges where initial acceleration didn't matter. A bazooka round doesn't need to be effective at 10 feet. A pistol absolutely does. The Gyrojet existed in an impossible middle ground. Too large and complex to compete with conventional handguns at close range. Too small and underpowered to match rifle performance at distance. It was an answer to a question no one was actually asking. Modern firearms research still explores concepts the Gyrojet pioneered. Caseless ammunition systems attempt to eliminate brass casings. Rocket-assisted projectiles extend range. Low-recoil weapon systems seek to reduce physical demands on shooters. The Gyrojet itself is largely forgotten outside collectors and historians. Production ceased in the early 1970s. The weapons that survive are curiosities, museum pieces, reminders of an experiment that promised revolution and delivered only lessons. But those lessons mattered. The Gyrojet demonstrated that innovation in firearms wasn't dead, that radical departures from conventional thinking could produce genuine advances even when they didn't produce deployable weapons. Today, the Gyrojet sits in museum cases, remembered not for what it achieved but for what it attempted. In an era of incremental improvements and conservative procurement, it stands as a monument to genuine innovation, to questioning fundamental assumptions. The weapon that promised to make bullets obsolete ended up demonstrating exactly why bullets remain dominant. But it did so through honest experimentation rather than theoretical speculation. The engineers who built it learned precisely where the boundaries of practical technology lay, and in doing so they mapped territory that later designers could build upon. The Gyrojet wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, it wasn't reliable enough for war, but it dared to imagine something entirely different. And sometimes, in the history of weapons, the experiments that fail teach us just as much as the ones that succeed.